Once the Assyrian Empire reigned supreme, its kings ruling from the sands of Egypt to the mountains of Elam, their banners casting long shadows over the ancient world. This is the story of empires, prophets, and the faith that endures through history. But with the death of Ashurbanipal, chaos erupted. Rebellions flared, thrones toppled, and Assyria's iron grip began to slip. In Babylon, Nabopolassar rose in revolt, defiant, unyielding. He forged an alliance with Cyaxares of the Medes, uniting their peoples against the Assyrian Colossus. Together, they struck at the heart of empire. Assur fell in 614 BCE, its walls shattered by the fury of Babylon and Media. 2 years later, Nineveh, the jewel of Assyria, was besieged and destroyed. The old world order crumbled in fire and blood. The last Assyrian king fled to Haran, but hope was fleeting. In 609 BCE, Haran too was lost, and with it, the Assyrian Empire vanished from history. Egypt, desperate to halt Babylon's rise, marched north. At Megiddo, Pharaoh Necho's armies clashed with Judah's king Josiah, who fell in battle, and with him, Judah's last hope of independence. Babylon triumphed. Nebuchadnezzar II rose in glory, his banners unfurling across the ruins of empires. A new world order dawned, one that would shape the fate of Jerusalem and the destiny of a prophet named Jeremiah. As the old world crumbled in the fires of Assyria's fall, a new power rose from the ashes. Babylon, led by Nabopolassar and his son Nebuchadnezzar, whose destinies would shape the fate of nations. A new power rose from the ashes. Babylon, led by the resolute Nabopolassar. With the Medes at his side, Nabopolassar struck the heart of empire, sacking Nineveh in 612 BCE and ending centuries of Assyrian dominance. But his true legacy would be his son, Nebuchadnezzar. Born to a dynasty forged in rebellion, Nebuchadnezzar's destiny was shaped on the battlefield. At Carchemish, in 605 BCE, the young crown prince faced Pharaoh Necho II in a clash that would decide the fate of empires. Babylon's chariots thundered across the plain, routing the Egyptians and shattering their ambitions. News of Nabopolassar's death sped to Nebuchadnezzar, who raced home to seize the throne, securing his place as Babylon's greatest king. For 43 years, the longest reign of any Babylonian ruler, Nebuchadnezzar expanded his empire's reach. His armies swept through the Levant, crushing resistance and subduing vassal kings. Jerusalem fell beneath his siege. Its walls toppled, its temple burned, and its people led into exile in 586 BCE. Tyre, the legendary island fortress, eventually bowed to Babylon's might. Nebuchadnezzar's banners stretched from the sands of Arabia to the mountains of Anatolia, casting a shadow over the ancient world. Yet Nebuchadnezzar was more than a conqueror. He was a builder, an architect of glory. Babylon's walls rose higher and stronger under his command, encircling the city in a ring of might. Temples and palaces gleamed in the Mesopotamian sun. The Ishtar Gate, a marvel of blue-glazed brick and roaring lions, stood as a testament to his ambition. And in legend, the Hanging Gardens, one of the world's wonders, bloomed above the city, a paradise in stone and greenery. But in the scrolls of the prophets, Nebuchadnezzar was cast in a different light. In the book of Jeremiah, he is God's instrument, an unwitting agent of judgment, sent to humble nations and fulfill divine decrees. In Daniel, he is the dreamer, the king who saw visions of empires and was struck down by madness, only to be restored by the hand of heaven. In all, Nebuchadnezzar stands as both conqueror and captive, a ruler wielding power, yet shaped by forces beyond his understanding. And so, as the sun sets over Babylon's golden towers, Nebuchadnezzar gazes across his empire, warrior, builder, and divine instrument. His legacy, etched in brick and prophecy, would echo through the ages, shaping the fate of Jerusalem and the destiny of a prophet named Jeremiah. As Babylon's star rose over the ruins of Assyria, another ancient power, Egypt, clung to relevance, its influence lingering but fading. Egypt's choices would become Judah's last hope and final mistake. Another ancient power clung to relevance, Egypt, land of pharaohs and fading glory. Once the unrivaled master of the Nile, Egypt now watched warily as foreign armies swept through the Levant. Pharaoh Necho II, heir to dynasties past, saw Babylon's ascent as a threat to Egypt's fragile hold on the region. He mustered his chariots and marched north, hoping to tip the scales of history. In the shadow of Megiddo, Necho's ambitions collided with the last righteous king of Judah. Josiah's death was a costly blow, but Necho pressed onward, his sights set on Carchemish, a strategic stronghold on the banks of the Euphrates. There, in 605 BCE, Egypt's fate would be sealed. Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon's young general, met Necho's armies in a battle that thundered across the ancient world. The Egyptians were routed, their dreams of empire shattered. From that day, Egypt's influence began to wane, its power eclipsed by Babylon's rising might. Yet in Jerusalem, hope lingered. Judah's leaders, desperate to resist Babylon, looked south for salvation. Again and again they sought Egypt's aid. Arms, alliances, promises whispered in the corridors of power. But the prophets warned. Egypt was a broken reed, a staff that would pierce the hand of any who leaned on it. Jeremiah's voice thundered against false trusts, condemning Judah's reliance on a neighbor whose strength was but an illusion. Still, the allure of Egypt persisted. Its golden legacy haunted Judah's imagination, a memory of deliverance from Pharaoh in ages past. But now, Egypt could offer only empty assurances. Its armies faltered, its influence faded, and its promises turned to dust. In the end, Egypt's legacy for Judah was not salvation, but sorrow, a cautionary tale of misplaced faith in the twilight of empires. In the twilight of Judah's independence, a child ascended the throne. Josiah, crowned king at just 8 years old, inheriting a kingdom battered by Assyrian rule and spiritual decay. As Josiah grew, so did his resolve. Inspired by the memory of Hezekiah, he sought to restore Judah's soul, purging the land of idols and altars to foreign gods. In the temple's forgotten recesses, priests discovered the Book of the Law. Its words struck Josiah to the heart, igniting a wave of reform unseen since the days of David. Pagan shrines were torn down, sacred groves burned, and idols smashed. Across Judah and even into the former northern lands of Israel, Josiah's reforms swept like a cleansing fire. He called the people back to the ancient covenant, and for the first time in generations, Passover was celebrated with awe and unity. Jerusalem pulsed with hope, its people united in worship, daring to believe that disaster might yet be averted. But beyond Judah's walls, the world was shifting. In 609 BCE, Pharaoh Necho II marched north to aid the dying Assyrian Empire. Josiah, defiant and faithful, rode out to Megiddo to block the Egyptian advance. The clash was brief and brutal. Josiah was struck down by Egyptian archers, mortally wounded in the chaos of battle. His men carried him back to Jerusalem, where he died, and the nation was plunged into grief. The people mourned as for no other king. Even the prophet Jeremiah wept, composing laments for the righteous ruler lost too soon. Josiah's reforms had been bold, his faith unyielding, but the hour was late. In the wake of his death, chaos returned. Jehoahaz, Josiah's son, reigned only 3 months before Pharaoh Necho deposed him. Egypt's grip tightened and Babylon's shadow loomed ever closer. With Josiah's passing, hope faded. Judah's defenses crumbled, its leaders faltered, and the door swung open for Babylon's relentless advance. In the silence that followed, Jeremiah's voice rose in sorrow, a lament for a king who tried to turn the tide, but whose sacrifice could not halt the storm to come. The death of Josiah cast a long shadow over Jerusalem. Babylonian banners rose on the horizon, and the storm that had threatened for years finally broke upon the city's walls. In 605 BCE, after the Great Battle of Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar's forces swept south. Jerusalem, trembling and divided, faced its first reckoning. Babylon's armies encircled the city, a warning more than a conquest. Among the hostages taken was a young noble named Daniel, carried off to serve in a foreign court. Jerusalem survived, but the message was clear. Babylon was now master of the world, and Judah's freedom hung by a thread. The second siege came in 597 BCE. Jehoiakim rebelled against Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar returned with vengeance. The city's walls shook under the assault. King Jehoiakim, desperate and surrounded, surrendered. The Babylonians plundered the temple's treasures and led thousands into exile. Among the exiles was Ezekiel, a young priest destined to become a prophet in a foreign land. Zedekiah, Babylon's chosen puppet, was left to rule the broken remnant. The wounds of exile cut deep, but Jerusalem still stood, its temple a flickering beacon of hope. The third and final siege began in 589 BCE. Against Jeremiah's warnings, Zedekiah rebelled, trusting in the empty promise of Egyptian aid. Babylon's response was swift and merciless. For 30 months the city endured siege, famine, disease, and despair consuming its people. Mothers wept for lost children. Priests mourned the silence of the temple. The city's hope faded with every passing day. In 586 BCE, the walls finally crumbled. Babylonian soldiers surged through the city, setting fire to the temple, the heart of Judah's faith, and tearing down the last defenses. Zedekiah was captured, blinded, and led away in chains. Jerusalem was left in ruins, its people scattered or enslaved. It was more than a national disaster. For the people of Judah, it was a spiritual crisis, the end of David's line, the loss of the temple, and the shattering of their world. In the ashes, prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel searched for meaning. They spoke of covenant broken, but also of hope renewed, a promise that even in exile, God would not abandon his people. The trauma of the sieges forced a reckoning with faith, identity, and survival. In Babylon, far from home, Judaism began to transform, no longer bound to land or temple alone, but to law, memory, and a hope for restoration. The 3 sieges of Jerusalem were not just military defeats. They were the crucible in which a nation was broken, refined, and reborn. Their memory would echo through centuries, shaping the soul of a people who learned to find faith even in the deepest shadow. Jerusalem, once a beacon of faith and strength, a city that stood for centuries, now faced its darkest hour, its walls trembling beneath Babylon's relentless siege. The vibrant streets were choked with fear and hunger, the air heavy with the dread of impending doom as Babylon's armies pressed ever closer. Hope flickered like a candle in a storm, while despair smothered the city, leaving only embers of courage in the hearts of a few. Fear was abundant, a suffocating blanket that settled over every home, every alley as the siege dragged on. Inside the city's battered walls, leaders argued and schemed, their voices echoing with desperation and uncertainty. They clung to false promises, alliances with Egypt that would never materialize, hoping for rescue that would not come. But the grim reality of dwindling food, water, and hope pressed in, weakening both their resolve and their defenses. In the midst of this chaos, the prophet Jeremiah, alone and steadfast, warned the people, "Surrender if you wish to survive." His plea was simple: preserve what little remained of your people and your faith, even if it means yielding to Babylon. But Jeremiah's words, though wise, were branded as treason, a betrayal of national pride and hope. The officials, blinded by fear and desperate to hold on to power, sought to silence him at any cost. Jeremiah was seized and thrown into a muddy cistern, a dark, forgotten pit beneath the city, left to die in silence. His voice, once a beacon, was nearly extinguished, his message buried in darkness, his fate seemingly sealed. In the chaos and descent into despair, few noticed the injustice. Few, but not all. One man saw what others ignored. Ebed-Melek, his name meaning servant of the king, was a Cushite eunuch, a foreigner in King Zedekiah's court. In a time of fear and injustice, his courage and faith would shine as a beacon of hope. A Cushite eunuch, a foreigner in King Zedekiah's court, set apart by his skin, his status, and his faith. Ebed-Melek was an outsider, an African official, a man with no power or privilege in the eyes of Judah's elite. Yet he saw injustice, a wrong that pierced through the noise, the fear, and the prejudice of the court. He could not ignore it, could not stand idly by while a prophet was left to die for speaking the truth. While others stayed silent, complicit in their inaction, Ebed-Melek's conscience stirred. Compelled by faith and moral courage, he resolved to act, risking everything for justice and mercy. In the darkness of Jerusalem's final days, a single act of courage, a spark of defiance, would echo through history, inspiring generations to come. In the pit, Jeremiah's voice was nearly lost, a whisper in the abyss, but not forgotten, not yet. Sometimes the bravest voices, the ones that change history, come from the most unexpected places, from the most humble of beginnings. And sometimes it is the outsider, the Cushite, the servant, the one overlooked, who becomes the true hero in Judah's darkest hour. In Jerusalem, fear and confusion reigned. The city's leaders, desperate and divided, sent envoys south, begging Egypt for help as Babylon's armies closed in. Each plea was a sign of their growing panic, not strength. Egypt, ancient and proud, promised rescue, its chariots glinting on the horizon. But when the hour of need arrived, Egypt's courage faltered. Their promises vanished like mist, leaving Jerusalem alone and exposed. King Zedekiah, clinging to hope, rebelled against Babylon, trusting in Egypt's empty words and turning away from the prophet's warnings. The city's fate hung by a thread of false hope. Alone, Jeremiah cried out above the chaos, "Do not trust in Egypt, that broken reed. Their help is hollow, their promises dust." But his voice was drowned by the clamor of fear and pride. The city's rulers, blinded by terror and arrogance, branded Jeremiah a traitor. They clung to illusions, silencing the only voice of truth among them. Enraged by Jeremiah's warnings, the officials demanded his death. To them, his honesty was a threat, his prophecies, an unbearable mirror of their own failures. They accused him of weakening the city's resolve, blaming him for the despair that their own cowardice had sown. The truth became the enemy. Zedekiah, paralyzed by fear, surrendered Jeremiah to their hands. "He is in your power," the king said, washing himself of guilt as Egypt's armies melted away and hope faded. Jeremiah was seized and lowered into a muddy cistern, a pit of darkness and despair, deep within the city's walls. There, he sank into the thick mud, abandoned to die in silence. The prophet's suffering was met with indifference from those in power. The officials believed they had silenced God's inconvenient messenger. But even in the deepest darkness, the faintest light of truth cannot be fully extinguished. Jerusalem's fate seemed sealed. Pride, fear, and the refusal to listen had brought the city to the brink of ruin. Justice was nowhere to be found among its rulers. Yet, in the shadows of power, a single conscience stirred. Ebed-Melek, a servant and outsider, saw the injustice others ignored. Sometimes, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the smallest act of courage and kindness can change the course of history. In the silence of the siege, a new hope began to flicker. For Jeremiah, abandoned in the cistern, the end seemed certain, a fate sealed by the cruelty and cowardice of powerful men. Or was it? Ebed-Melek, an Ethiopian servant, an outsider in the royal court, overlooked by many but not by God, heard of Jeremiah's plight. He learned that Jeremiah, the prophet, had been cast into a muddy cistern, left to die in darkness and despair. Ebed-Melek had no power, no status, no obligation, yet compassion stirred within him. He could have remained silent, invisible among the powerful, but faith and justice would not let him rest. He resolved to act, risking everything. Ebed-Melek went boldly to King Zedekiah at the city gate, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "My lord the king, these men have done evil. Jeremiah will die if he remains in the cistern." Zedekiah, moved by Ebed-Melek's courage, granted him permission to rescue the prophet. Without delay, Ebed-Melek gathered old rags and ropes, tools of mercy, not of war. With quiet determination, he and his companions hurried to the cistern, lowering the rags to Jeremiah so the ropes would not cut his flesh. Gently they lifted Jeremiah from the darkness, an act of compassion shining in a city gripped by fear. In that moment, Ebed-Melek's bravery was matched by his kindness. In a city of despair, one outsider's faith saved a prophet's life. The Lord saw Ebed-Melek's heart. Through Jeremiah, God promised, "You trusted in me. You will be delivered from harm. Your life will be your prize." Ebed-Melek's story echoes through the ages, a testament to the power of faith, courage, and the outsider's role in God's plan. In the tapestry of Scripture, it is often the foreigner, the humble, the unexpected hero who reveals the heart of God. Sometimes the greatest hero is the one who simply refuses to look away. Ebed-Melek's act was small, but its impact was eternal. As Jerusalem's walls crumbled and hope faded, one man's faith stood unshaken: Ebed-Melek, the outsider who risked everything for justice. While Egypt's armies surged north and Babylon's siege briefly lifted, it was not the powerful who would be remembered, but the righteous. Egypt's courage faltered, and Babylon returned with vengeance. Jerusalem's leaders, who trusted in alliances and power, watched as their city fell, while Ebed-Melek's quiet faith shone brighter than any banner. The city was shattered, walls broken, homes burning, its people scattered in exile. Yet in the ashes, God's promise was spoken not to a king, but to Ebed-Melek, a reward for courage, compassion, and unwavering trust. "Because you trusted in me," God declared, "you will be delivered. No harm will come to you. Your life will be a prize, for you have acted with justice and mercy." While kings and priests faltered, Ebed-Melek's legacy endured, a beacon of hope in the darkest hour. His story reminds us that true greatness is found in faith, justice, and the courage to do what is right, even when all seems lost. In the aftermath, as empires fell and the world changed, Ebed-Melek's faith became his shield, his name remembered as a testament to the power of compassion and the promise of deliverance. Sometimes the greatest rewards are reserved not for the powerful, but for those who act with kindness and courage when no one else will. Ebed-Melek's story is a light for all generations, a promise shining amidst the ruins. But Ebed-Melek's story is not alone. Centuries later, another outsider, a royal official from Ethiopia, would journey north, reading the prophet's scroll as he traveled the desert road. Like Ebed-Melek, he was a foreigner, a servant, a man of faith who listened when others would not. Both Ebed-Melek and the Ethiopian eunuch stood at the crossroads of history, outsiders with moral clarity, divinely affirmed at pivotal moments. When others with power remained silent, they acted with courage and faith. Their stories reveal Africa's prophetic, present, and pivotal role in the biblical narrative. From rescuing the prophet in the cistern to receiving the Messiah in the scroll, Africa has always been listening and responding. History remembers mighty kings and warriors, like Tirhaka of Ethiopia, but Ebed-Melek's heroism was different. Quiet, personal, and rooted in conscience. He risked everything, not for glory, but to save a single life. His courage was not on the battlefield, but in the court, armed only with truth. Ebed-Melek, a foreigner, showed more faith than Judah's leaders. His story proves that anyone, from any background, can be an instrument of justice. True heroism is measured by compassion and faith, not power or fame. Ebed-Melek's legacy is a single righteous act, a light in the darkest hour. You don't need status to make a difference. Sometimes the quietest voices leave the deepest mark. Jerusalem lay in ruins, its walls broken, its people scattered. Amid the ashes, Jeremiah stood, spared by Nebuchadnezzar, yet choosing to remain with the remnant in Judah. His journey would become a testament to faith, endurance, and the cost of truth. For a brief moment, hope flickered under the care of Gedaliah, the governor appointed by Babylon. But that hope was violently extinguished. Gedaliah was assassinated, and terror swept through the survivors. In the dead of night, the remnant fled, dragging Jeremiah and his scribe Baruch with them, desperate to escape Babylon's wrath. As they prepared to cross into Egypt, Jeremiah pleaded with them, "Do not go to Egypt. Babylon's reach will find you even there." But his warnings fell on fearful ears. The people, hearts heavy with dread, forced the prophet into exile, leaving behind the land he loved for the uncertain refuge of Pharaoh's domain. Through barren wilderness and guarded borders, the remnant journeyed south, carrying with them the last voice of Judah's conscience. In exile, Jeremiah's heart ached for his people, even as they turned away from his counsel. In Egyptian cities, Tahpanhes, Migdol, Memphis, Jeremiah's voice rose again. He condemned the return to idolatry, especially the worship of the Queen of Heaven. But the exiles clung to old ways, rejecting his message and seeking comfort in familiar falsehoods. Still, Jeremiah persisted, warning that no walls or foreign gods could shield them from Babylon's judgment. In Tahpanhes, Jeremiah performed a sign. He buried stones at Pharaoh's palace, declaring, "Here, Nebuchadnezzar will set his throne. Babylon's armies will invade even Egypt." His prophetic act was a final plea for repentance, a warning etched in the very soil of their new refuge. Years passed. Then, as Jeremiah foretold, Babylon's soldiers swept into Egypt, iron and fire crossing the Nile. The Judean exiles, who had fled for safety, found no refuge from judgment, their hopes shattered amidst foreign sands. The Bible is silent on Jeremiah's death. Tradition whispers he died in Egypt, perhaps martyred by his own people. His final words were a lament, a cry for repentance, echoing in a foreign land, longing for a people to listen. Egypt, once the house of bondage, became Judah's last temptation, a symbol of misplaced trust. Like Moses, Jeremiah died outside the promised land, his heart yearning for home, his spirit unbroken. Jeremiah's legacy was not one of triumph, but of endurance, a voice of truth that could not be silenced, even in exile. His story endures, a beacon for all who seek justice and hope in the darkest of times. Forced from his homeland, Jeremiah crossed into Egypt with the weary exiles, his heart heavy, his spirit unbroken. In the cities of Tahpanhes, Migdol, and Memphis, Jeremiah's voice rose again, warning the exiles not to trust in Egypt, not to return to the idols of their past. But the people, battered by fear and longing for safety, clung to the rituals of the Queen of Heaven, refusing to listen. In a final haunting sign, Jeremiah buried stones at the gates of Pharaoh's palace, declaring, "Here, Babylon's king will set his throne." Years passed, then Babylon's armies swept across the Nile, iron and fire consuming Egypt's cities, just as Jeremiah had foretold. The Judean exiles who had hoped for sanctuary faced disaster and loss, the silence of dreams undone. The Bible falls silent on Jeremiah's end. Tradition whispers he died in Egypt, perhaps martyred, his final lament echoing in a foreign land. Egypt, once the house of bondage, became Judah's last temptation, a place where trust in human power proved fatally misplaced. Yet Jeremiah's legacy was not defeat but endurance, a voice of truth that could not be silenced, even in exile. His words survived the ruins, a testament that prophecy does not die with the prophet. In the end, Jeremiah's life asks every generation, will you listen, even when the world turns away? The story of Jeremiah, Ebed-Melek, and the fall of Jerusalem is not just ancient history, it is a call to seek truth, act with courage, and trust in faith even when the world seems lost. Will you listen, even when others turn away?